I'm Clara, 29 female. I live in a city where the skyline is a testament to dreams, both realized and broken. For the past 7 years, my life was a carefully constructed marathon of work, sleep, and more work, all funneled toward a single, luminous goal: a place to call my own. By day, I'm a senior graphic designer, managing brand aesthetics and pixel-perfect layouts for a demanding marketing firm. By night, and on every weekend, I was a freelance designer, and for a particularly grueling 2-year stretch, a barista, the scent of coffee beans clinging to me like a second skin. It was a life of sacrifice, of turning down invitations and living on a shoestring budget, all for the moment I could hold a set of keys that belonged to me and no one else. This story is about the day that moment finally arrived, and how the people I thought would be cheering the loudest were the very ones who tried to tear it all down. It's about how I planned a housewarming party to celebrate my greatest achievement, only to be abandoned for a backyard barbecue, and how a single phone call that night revealed a truth about my family that was more horrifying than their absence. They didn't just want my forgiveness, they wanted my future. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The apartment wasn't large, but it was mine. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street, and walls that were blissfully, wonderfully empty. For the past week, I had lived in a happy chaos of boxes and bubble wrap, slowly carving out a home. The final piece was the housewarming party. It wasn't about showing off. It was about sharing the culmination of my relentless effort with my family. My mom, Susan, my uncle Robert, and my cousin, Ethan. They were my entire family, the people who were supposed to be my bedrock. I'd sent out the invitations, simple, elegant cards I designed myself, 3 weeks in advance. The RSVP date had come and gone, and while I hadn't received formal replies, I'd gotten enthusiastic verbal confirmations from everyone. "Of course, we'll be there, sweetie," my mom had chirped over the phone. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. So proud of you." Uncle Robert had been similarly effusive, clapping me on the back during our last family dinner. "That's my niece, smart with her money. We'll have to toast to your success." Even Ethan, who usually communicated in one-word grunts, had given me a thumbs up and a rare, "Cool, Clara," free food. The party was set for a Saturday at 7 p.m. I spent the entire day in a state of joyful exhaustion. I unpacked the last of the kitchen boxes, arranging my mismatched collection of plates and glasses. I bought flowers, bright yellow sunflowers, that I placed in a vase on the new, small dining table I'd assembled myself. The place smelled of fresh paint and lemon-scented cleaner. It smelled like a fresh start. I didn't have much furniture yet, just the table, a couple of chairs, and a large rug, but I figured we'd mostly stand and mingle. I wanted it to be casual, a celebration of the space itself. For food, I decided against complicated catering. Pizza. It felt right, unpretentious, communal, and a nostalgic nod to the countless late nights I'd fueled my freelance work with a simple cheese slice. I ordered from the best artisanal place in the neighborhood. 5 large pizzas with a variety of toppings, a huge garden salad, and several bottles of soda and sparkling wine. As 7 p.m. approached, my heart beat a little faster with anticipation. I lit a few candles, put on a curated playlist of soft indie pop, and took one last look around. Everything was perfect. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow through the living room window. I imagined the apartment filled with laughter, with my mom admiring the countertops I'd chosen, with my uncle giving me unsolicited but well-meaning advice about property values. 7:15 p.m. arrived. Then 7:30 p.m. the street below was quiet. My phone remained silent. A knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach. They were probably just stuck in traffic. It was a Saturday night after all. I sent a lighthearted text to our family group chat. "The pizza is getting lonely. Hope you guys are close." No reply. At 7:45 p.m. I tried calling my mom. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey mom, just checking in. Let me know your ETA." Next, I tried Uncle Robert. His phone rang twice before also going to voicemail. A cold dread, heavy and unwelcome, started to seep into the room, chilling the celebratory atmosphere. It was 8:15 p.m. when I got the first text. It was from my mom. "So sorry, sweetie. Something came up last minute. Ethan decided to have a barbecue at his place to celebrate his new patio furniture. The whole family is here. It's lovely. We'll have to see your place another Tim. So proud of you, Zaxa." I stared at the message, the words blurring together. A last-minute barbecue for patio furniture. My entire family, which consisted of 3 people, had ditched my housewarming, a celebration of a life-altering achievement, for an impromptu gathering centered around outdoor seating. The casual cheerfulness of her text was like a physical blow. The "so proud of you" felt like a cruel, dismissive pat on the head. A few minutes later, a picture landed in the group chat. It was a selfie of my mom, Uncle Robert, and Ethan, all grinning widely. Ethan was holding a pair of tongs, and behind them, a pristine new grill was smoking away on a patch of artificial turf. They looked happy. They looked like they hadn't given me a second thought. My phone buzzed again, a text from Ethan this time. "Sorry, barbecue was a last-minute vibe. Rain check, that was it. No apology, no explanation, just a casual dismissal. Uncle Robert didn't even bother to message me directly." The silence from him was perhaps the most telling of all. The apartment, which had felt so full of promise just an hour earlier, now felt cavernously empty. The 5 pizza boxes sat unopened on the kitchen counter, their warmth long gone. The sunflowers seemed to droop in their vase. The indie pop music that had felt so cheerful now sounded melancholic and hollow. I walked over to the counter and opened one of the pizza boxes. The scent of cold, congealed cheese filled the air. I picked up a slice of pepperoni and took a bite, but it tasted like cardboard and disappointment. I couldn't swallow. I put the slice back in the box and closed the lid. I sank onto the floor, my back against the kitchen cabinets, and wrapped my arms around my knees. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the bare walls. I didn't cry. I was too numb for tears. I just sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of a celebration that never happened, feeling the immense weight of being an afterthought in my own family. The joy of the day had been completely hollowed out, replaced by a profound and aching loneliness. That night, my new home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a monument to my own insignificance in their lives. I must have sat on the floor for over an hour, the silence of the apartment broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of city traffic. I'd blown out the candles and turned off the music, plunging the room into a comfortable darkness illuminated by the streetlights outside. The initial shock had hardened into a familiar, weary resignation. This wasn't the first time I'd been sidelined for something related to Ethan, but this instance felt particularly cruel. It was a clear, unambiguous statement of my place in the family hierarchy, solidly at the bottom. Eventually, I peeled myself off the floor, my joints stiff. I packed the untouched pizzas into the fridge, a sad stack of cardboard coffins, and threw the wilted salad into the trash. The party was officially over. I changed into an old t-shirt and sweatpants, washed the disappointment off my face, and crawled into bed. I expected to lie awake for hours, replaying the hurt in my mind, but exhaustion claimed me quickly. The 7 years of relentless work had taken their toll, and my body simply shut down. It was the ringing of my phone on the nightstand that jolted me awake. The screen glowed with my mom's picture. My first groggy thought was that it was an apology call. Maybe now that the barbecue was over, the guilt had set in. I let it ring a few more times, my anger warring with a daughter's ingrained instinct to answer her mother's call. Finally, I swiped to answer, my voice thick with sleep. "Hello. Clara, sweetie, were you sleeping? It's only 10:30. Her voice was startlingly bright and cheerful, laced with the happy buzz of someone who'd had a glass or 2 of wine. There was no trace of apology in her tone. "I was tired, Mom," I said, my own voice flat and cold. "Oh, well, we had the most wonderful time. Ethan's new patio set is just gorgeous. And Robert is such a master on the grill. You really should have been there," she chirped, completely oblivious to the absurdity of her statement. I bit back the scathing retort that was on the tip of my tongue. "I couldn't have been there, Mom. I was here, at my housewarming, the one you were supposed to be at." There was a brief pause. "Oh, right, gosh, that's right. I'm so sorry about that, sweetie. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing, you know how Ethan is. We'll make it up to you, I promise. We'll come see the apartment next week." Her apology was so breezy, so utterly devoid of genuine remorse, it was almost more insulting than her absence. It was a social nicety, a box she was checking off before moving on to the real reason for her call. "Anyway," she continued, her tone shifting from airy apology to business-like efficiency, "I was just talking to your uncle, and he had the most brilliant idea. We were all talking about you and your new place, and how proud we are." I stayed silent, a sense of foreboding creeping over me. My uncle's brilliant ideas rarely benefited anyone but himself. "He knows so much about real estate, Clara," my mom went on, her voice filled with admiration for her brother. "And he was saying that with the market being so volatile, it's a bit risky for someone your age to have such a significant asset all in your own name. It's a lot of liability." I sat up straighter in bed, the last vestiges of sleep vanishing. "What are you talking about, Mom? It's my apartment, I bought it. Of course it's in my name." "Well, yes, for now," she said placatingly. "But Robert thinks it would be much smarter, a much better long-term strategy for the whole family, if you were to put the deed in his name." The words hung in the air, so ludicrous, so utterly detached from reality, that for a moment I was convinced I was still asleep and having a bizarre stress dream. I must have misheard her. "Put the deed in Uncle Robert's name?" I repeated slowly, the words feeling foreign and nonsensical in my mouth. "Exactly," she said, pleased that I was seemingly understanding. "He could manage it as part of the family's overall asset portfolio. It protects you, and it strengthens the family's financial position. He mentioned something about leveraging it for other investments that would benefit everyone, including you, of course. It's just a formality, really. A smart, protective measure." I was speechless. The sheer, unmitigated gall of the suggestion was breathtaking. They hadn't just skipped my party, they had apparently spent their evening plotting how to take my home from me. The home I had sacrificed my 20s for. The home I had paid for with my own sweat, exhaustion, and relentless determination. They saw my name on the deed not as an achievement to be celebrated, but as an inconvenience to be corrected. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You all skipped my housewarming party, and while you were celebrating my cousin's new patio furniture, you decided that the best way to show how proud you are of me is to ask me to sign over my property to Uncle Robert." My mom's cheerful tone finally faltered. She heard the ice in my voice. "Now, Clara, don't be so dramatic. It's not like that. It's a practical matter. Robert is just trying to look out for you, for all of us. He has our best interests at heart. He said it would be for the family." For the family? That phrase. It was the cudgel they'd always used to get their way, the justification for every time my needs were sublimated to theirs, every time my boundaries were crossed. It was a shield for their selfishness. "No," I said. The word was small, but it felt as solid as steel. "What?" "No, the answer is no. This conversation is insane. I am not putting my apartment in Uncle Robert's name. Not now, not ever." A huffy, indignant sigh came through the phone. "Clara, you're not thinking clearly. You're being emotional. You don't understand these things. Your uncle is an expert." "I understand that I worked 2 jobs for 7 years to buy this place," I interrupted, my voice rising with a fury I could no longer contain. "I understand that I own it, and I understand that you and Uncle Robert seem to think you have some right to it. You don't. It is mine." "You are being incredibly selfish and ungrateful," she snapped, her voice turning sharp and accusatory. "After all Robert has done for this family." I couldn't listen to any more. I couldn't hear another word of her deluded justifications or her manipulative guilt-tripping. With a surge of adrenaline, I ended the call, my thumb stabbing at the red icon on the screen. The line went dead. I threw the phone onto the other side of the bed as if it were contaminated. The apartment was silent again, but this time it wasn't a lonely silence. It was a ringing, echoing silence, filled with the sheer audacity of my family's greed. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had seen my success as a resource to be plundered. And in that moment, the hurt I'd felt earlier curdled into something else entirely. A cold, hard, and resolute anger. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and a heart full of rage. The conversation with my mother felt like a fever dream, but the sick feeling in the pit of my stomach confirmed it was all too real. My phone showed a series of missed calls from her and a single, terse text message. "We need to talk about your attitude." I ignored it, the words "my attitude" fanning the flames of my anger. It wasn't my attitude that was the problem. It was their breathtaking sense of entitlement. I needed to talk to someone who lived in the real world, someone whose moral compass wasn't hopelessly skewed. I called Maya. "Hey, how was the party?" she answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "I'm so sorry I couldn't make it. The audit fro." Hell is finally over, I swear." "The dam broke." The words came tumbling out of me in a torrent of disbelief and fury. I told her everything. The empty apartment, the pathetic excuses, the selfie from Ethan's barbecue, and the grand finale, the unbelievable phone call from my mother. I recounted the part about Uncle Robert wanting the deed in his name, for the family, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Maya was silent for a long moment after I finished, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her analytical, accountant's brain. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of its earlier cheerfulness, replaced by a cold, hard edge I rarely heard. "Clara, this is not just audacious. This is predatory." "Predatory? Maya, it's my family." Even as I said it, the words tasted like a lie. "I don't care if it's the Pope," she shot back. "Normal families don't celebrate their daughter's biggest life achievement by plotting to seize her assets. This is a 5-alarm fire. You need to see this for what it is." As we talked, Maya began to pull at the threads of my past, forcing me to look at the fabric of my family dynamics not as a series of isolated incidents, but as a coherent, deliberate pattern. She was right. It had been happening for years, so subtly at first that I'd barely noticed, dismissing each instance as a one-off, an oversight, or me just being too sensitive. "Remember your college graduation?" Maya asked gently. "What happened then?" The memory surfaced instantly, tinged with a familiar shame. I had graduated with honors, the first in our family to even finish a 4-year degree. My parents had promised a graduation dinner at my favorite restaurant. But the day before, Uncle Robert announced that Ethan, who was 16 at the time, had won a regional video game tournament. My celebratory dinner was canceled and replaced with a last-minute trip 2 states over to watch Ethan compete in the finals. He lost in the first round. My graduation was marked with a belated, wilted bouquet of carnations and a card with $20 in it. At the time, I'd swallowed my disappointment, telling myself it was important to support Ethan's passions. "And what about the money for your first car?" Maya pressed. I winced. After college, I'd saved $5,000 for a reliable used car to get to my first design job. The week I was going to buy it, Uncle Robert's family had a financial emergency. Ethan needed money for a prestigious summer program in Europe. My mother had come to me, her eyes filled with manufactured tears, and asked me to loan the money to the family. It was for Ethan's future, she'd explained. A good investment in the family's collective success. I reluctantly handed over my entire savings. The money was never mentioned again, and I spent the next year taking 3 different buses to get to work. Ethan spent his summer posting photos from Paris and Rome. Listening to Maya connect the dots was like watching a hidden image emerge in a child's coloring book. The lines had always been there, but I had refused to see the picture they formed. My achievements were minimized or ignored, while Ethan's most trivial whims were treated as monumental events. My resources, my time, my money, my emotional energy, were considered communal property, to be drawn upon whenever it suited them. I was the family workhorse, the reliable, responsible one whose role was to produce, while they, and particularly Ethan, were entitled to consume. "They've been grooming you for this your whole life, Clara," Maya said, her voice firm. "They've conditioned you to accept that your role is to provide and sacrifice, and their role is to take. You getting this apartment on your own without any help from them, it breaks that pattern. It's a major asset that is entirely outside of their control, and they can't stand it. Robert doesn't want to protect your asset. He wants to control it. He wants to fold it back into the system, where he is in charge of the resources. Her words hit me with the force of a physical impact. She was absolutely right. This wasn't a sudden, bizarre request. It was the logical, terrifying culmination of my entire life with them. They didn't see me, Clara, the individual. They saw a resource, a walking, talking savings account with a design degree. My new apartment wasn't a home in their eyes, it was an untapped line of credit. The pride I felt in my accomplishment was being twisted into a liability. My success wasn't something for them to celebrate, it was something for them to absorb. "What do I do, Maya?" I asked, my voice small. The anger was still there, but it was now mingled with a profound sense of grief for the family I thought I had, the family I had desperately wanted them to be. "First," she said, her tone shifting into practical, problem-solving mode, "you don't talk to them. Not your mom, not your uncle. No calls, no texts. You need to create a wall of silence. Let them wonder. Second, you and I are going to do a little digging. Your uncle is a real estate agent, you said, and he's so concerned about family assets. Let's find out what his own assets look like. Something about this stinks to high heaven. People with healthy finances don't try to swindle property from their 29-year-old niece." A new feeling began to bubble up through the anger and the grief, determination. Maya was right. I had spent years being the dutiful daughter, the compliant niece, the supportive cousin. I had swallowed my disappointment, rationalized their neglect, and funded their whims. I had let them define my role in the family narrative. But now they had overplayed their hand. They had come for the one thing that was unequivocally mine, the physical manifestation of my independence. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for passivity. It was a mistake they were going to regret. The pattern of entitlement was about to be broken, and I was going to be the one to break it. Following Maya's advice, I initiated a strict no-contact policy. My mother's calls became more frequent, her texts escalating from demanding, "Call me now," to pleading, "Clara, please, your uncle is very upset." Uncle Robert tried a different tactic, sending a single, patronizing email with the subject line, "Regarding your financial future." I read the first line. I was disappointed by your immature reaction to a sensible business proposal, before deleting it without reading the rest. Every message they sent only reinforced the cold certainty that Maya was right. This was a calculated move, and my refusal to play along had thrown them into a panic. While they stewed, Maya and I got to work. My daytime job was in design, but my freelance gigs had often required me to be a jack of all trades, including a surprisingly adept online researcher. Maya, with her accountant's mind, knew exactly where to look. Everything in property and most business dealings leaves a paper trail, she explained over a video call, sharing her screen with me. Most of it is public record if you know how to access it. Our first stop was the county registrar's office website. We started with Uncle Robert. He had always cultivated an image of success. He drove a luxury sedan, wore expensive suits, and lived in a large house in a prestigious suburb, the very house where my aunt, who had passed away years ago, had raised Ethan. He was the patriarch, the financial wizard of the family. He loved to hold court at family gatherings, dispensing unsolicited advice about stocks, investments, and the importance of building wealth. The online records told a very different story. We quickly found the deed for his primary residence. It had a second mortgage taken out on it just 2 years ago for a substantial amount. That was the first red flag. People in a strong financial position don't typically take out secondary mortgages unless it's for a major investment with a guaranteed return, Maya noted, her brow furrowed. It's often a sign of cash flow problems. We kept digging. We found 2 other properties listed under his name, small rental units in a less desirable part of the city. He'd always referred to them as his income properties. But public records showed they were drowning in debt. One had a tax lien against it from the city for 2 years of unpaid property taxes. The other was the subject of an ongoing legal dispute with a former tenant over unsafe living conditions. Worse still, we discovered a recent judgment against him from a supplier for his real estate business. He owed over $50,000 for staging furniture and marketing materials that he had never paid for. The image of the successful patriarch began to crumble, replaced by the portrait of a man desperately trying to stay afloat. His expensive car was likely leased. His suits were a costume. His entire lifestyle was a carefully constructed facade, and the foundation was cracking. Next, we turned our attention to Ethan, my cousin, the startup founder. His company, VibeConnect, was supposedly a revolutionary social media app for event planners. He'd secured seed funding a year ago and was always talking about being on the verge of a major breakthrough. Uncle Robert spoke of him with beaming pride, telling everyone Ethan was the next Mark Zuckerberg. I searched for VibeConnect's business registration. It was registered as a simple LLC, with the address listed as Ethan's rented condo. There were no patents filed, no trademarks registered. The company's social media presence was pathetic, a few hundred followers and posts that were months old. Maya used her access to a professional business database to pull a credit report on the LLC. The findings were damning. The company had taken out a significant business loan 6 months prior, personally guaranteed by Uncle Robert. There was almost no revenue to speak of, and the company was bleeding money. "This isn't a startup, Clara," Maya said, her voice grim. "This is a vanity project funded by debt." The seed funding wasn't from investors. It was from a bank with your uncle co-signing. They're on the hook for all of it. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. We pieced together a timeline. The second mortgage on Robert's house, the business loan for Ethan's failing startup, the tax liens, the lawsuits, it all painted a picture of a family in a financial death spiral. They weren't just short on cash, they were on the verge of collapse. And then I had bought my apartment. An unencumbered asset. A pristine property with no loans, no liens, nothing but my name on the deed. "Oh my God," I whispered, staring at the screen. "They don't want my apartment to leverage for investments. They want it as collateral." "Exactly," Maya confirmed. "With the deed in Robert's name, he could take out a massive loan against your property's value. He could use it to pay off his debts, to pour more money into Ethan's joke of a company. He would strip all the equity out of it, leaving you with nothing but the mortgage payments, if you were even still on the mortgage. More likely, he'd try to convince you to sign it over completely." The cold, calculated nature of their plan was chilling. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate. They saw my years of hard work not as an inspiration, but as their personal bailout package. They were willing to sacrifice my entire financial future to maintain their crumbling illusion of success. The family barbecue wasn't just a casual get-together. It was likely a strategy session where a desperate father and his entitled son convinced a weak-willed mother to be their messenger. My mother wasn't just a passive enabler. She was an active participant in a conspiracy to defraud her own daughter. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. The anger was still there, but it was now honed to a fine point, sharp and clear. They had underestimated me. They saw me as the quiet, compliant girl they had always known, the one who would eventually cave to the pressure of, for the family. They had no idea who I had become. During those 7 years of struggle, I had learned to be tough, to be resilient, and most importantly, to fight for what was mine. "Maya," I said, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. "I think it's time I had a talk with my family, but it's not going to be the talk they're expecting. They want to talk about family assets? Fine, let's talk about family assets." The plan began to form in my mind, not one of simple refusal, but of strategic, brilliant offense. I would use their own twisted logic, their own language of family unity and collective good, to build a trap they would walk into themselves. For the next 3 days, I didn't just sit on the information we'd uncovered. I weaponized it. With Maya's guidance and a consultation with a lawyer she knew, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, I began to construct my counteroffensive. The goal was no longer simply to protect my apartment, but to expose their deceit in a way they could never deny or twist. I wasn't just going to say no, I was going to make them wish they had never, ever asked. The core of the plan was to embrace their premise. They wanted to treat my apartment as a family asset? Fine, we would create a formal structure for all family assets. The Clara, Susan, and Robert Family Trust. It sounded official, collaborative, and entirely reasonable. It was the perfect bait. Ms. Albright helped me draft the preliminary documents for a legally sound, irrevocable trust. The terms were simple and deceptively fair. The trust would be managed by a neutral third-party trustee, appointed by the law firm to ensure impartiality. To fund the trust, each of the 3 primary members, myself, my mother Susan, and Uncle Robert, would be required to contribute their primary real estate assets. The trust would then manage these properties for the collective benefit of all family members, including Ethan, who would be listed as a beneficiary. The genius of the plan was in the details. The trust agreement included a standard but crucial clause. All contributed assets must be free of liens and significant encumbrances, or the full extent of any associated debts must be disclosed and accounted for in the valuation. Furthermore, all members would have to submit to a thorough financial disclosure, providing tax returns and statements of assets and liabilities for the past 5 years. It was a truth serum disguised as a legal document. Once the framework was ready, I broke my silence. I didn't call my mother or my uncle. Instead, I sent a carefully worded email to the 2 of them from my personal email address. Subject: an excellent idea, let's formalize it. Dear Mom and Uncle Robert, I hope you are both well. I want to apologize for my initial reaction during our last phone call. I was tired and caught off guard, and I didn't give your proposal the consideration it deserved. After taking some time to think, I've come to realize the wisdom in your idea about consolidating our resources for the family's long-term security. You are right, Uncle Robert. Managing a significant asset alone is daunting, and your expertise in real estate would be invaluable. I agree that we should approach our finances as a collective for the benefit of all of us, including Ethan. To that end, I have taken the liberty of speaking with a financial advisor and a lawyer to discuss the best way to structure this. They suggested that instead of a simple transfer of deed, which can have complicated tax implications, we should establish a formal family trust. This would be a much more professional and equitable way to manage our collective assets. I've attached a preliminary proposal. The basic idea is that we would each place our primary properties into the trust. It would protect our assets and allow us to manage them strategically for future growth. I am fully prepared to place my new apartment into this trust. I believe this is the perfect way to honor our family bond and secure our future together. I would love to host a meeting at my apartment this coming Saturday so we can discuss the details and sign the foundational documents. Please let me know if 2 p.m. works for you both. With love and excitement for our future. Clara. I attached the proposal overview, which was professionally formatted and littered with official-sounding legal terms, but deliberately vague on the most damning clauses like the full financial disclosure. I wanted them to see the prize, my apartment going into a collective pot, without scrutinizing the cost of entry. I hit send and leaned back, my heart pounding. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait and see if they would take the bait. It took less than an hour. My phone rang. It was my mother. I took a deep breath and answered, slipping into the role of the contrite, naive daughter. Clara, oh, I'm so glad you called. Well, emailed. Her voice was flooded with relief and a hint of triumph. I told Robert you'd come around. You were. Just being emotional before. This is so much more like the sensible girl we raised. I just needed some time to think it through, Mom, I said, keeping my voice soft and agreeable. It was a big idea to process. It's a brilliant idea, she gushed. A family trust. It sounds so official, so wealthy. Robert is reading your email now. He's very impressed. He said you have a good head on your shoulders after all. I could hear my uncle's booming voice in the background. My mom put him on speakerphone. "Clara," he said, his tone oozing with condescending approval. "I knew you'd see the light. A trust is an excellent vehicle." Excellent. A bit more complex than my initial suggestion, but it shows you're taking this seriously. Good girl. Saturday at 2 p.m. is perfect. We'll be there. Send over any documents ahead of time for me to review. Of course, Uncle, I replied sweetly. I'll send the full agreement over on Friday. It's mostly standard legal language. I knew he would likely only skim it, his eyes focused on the prize, getting control of my property. His ego would never allow him to believe his emotional and immature niece could outmaneuver him. We ended the call on a nauseatingly cheerful note. My mother was overjoyed, believing she had successfully wrangled her difficult daughter back into line. My uncle was smug, confident that his plan was coming to fruition, albeit in a slightly different form. They had no idea that they weren't coming to my apartment on Saturday to claim a victory. They were walking into an ambush I had meticulously designed just for them. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I arranged for Ms. Albright to be present at the meeting, introducing her via email as my legal counsel who is helping facilitate the trust formation. I printed multiple copies of the full, unabridged trust agreement. And most importantly, I printed out every public record we had found. The deeds showing the second mortgage, the court records of the tax liens, and the judgment against his business, the credit report on Ethan's shell company. I placed them all in a neat folder, ready for their grand entrance. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Saturday arrived, a bright, crisp autumn day. The sunlight that streamed through my living room windows felt different this time, not warm and inviting, but sharp and clarifying like the light in an operating room. I had spent the morning preparing not for a party, but for a battle. Ms. Albright arrived at 1:30 p.m., a calm and formidable presence in a tailored navy suit. We set up the dining table with 4 chairs, a pitcher of water, and 4 neat stacks of documents. 1 stack for each attendee. My folder of incriminating evidence sat discreetly by my side. At precisely 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mother, my uncle, and my cousin Ethan standing there. My mom was beaming, holding a cheap bottle of sparkling wine as a peace offering. Uncle Robert was the picture of smug satisfaction, carrying a leather briefcase. Ethan, dragged along for the ceremony, looked profoundly bored, already scrolling through his phone. "Clara, darling, your place is just lovely," my mother gushed, stepping inside and looking around. "So much potential." "It's a solid investment," Uncle Robert declared, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced, proprietary air. "Good bones. We'll get a great valuation on this for the trust." I smiled a tight, polite smile. "Please come in, have a seat. This is Ms. Albright, my legal counsel." Robert gave Ms. Albright a cursory nod, the kind of dismissive gesture a powerful man gives to a subordinate. "A pleasure," he said, clearly seeing her as a mere formality. "Shall we get to it? I have a golf game at 4. We all sat down at the table. I watched as my mother and uncle picked up their copies of the trust agreement. Ethan didn't bother, immediately sinking into his phone once more. Robert flipped through the first few pages with an air of professional impatience. "Standard boilerplate," he muttered, skimming over the legal jargon. "Purpose of the trust, appointment of beneficiaries, it all seems to be in order." "I'm glad you think so," I said calmly. "I believe the most important section begins on page 4, contribution and valuation of assets. As we discussed, the foundation of the trust requires each primary member to contribute their main real estate asset. For me, that's this apartment." "Of course," Robert said, smiling magnanimously. "And for me, my primary residence. It's a very generous contribution, worth substantially more than this unit, but I'm happy to do it for the family." "Excellent," I said, my voice steady. "And Mom, you'll be contributing Grandma's old house, which you inherited." My mom nodded eagerly, thrilled to be part of such an important-sounding enterprise. "Now," I continued, turning to a specific page, "if you'll look at Article 4, Section B, subsection Roman 3, you'll see the clause regarding encumbrances. It states that all contributed properties must be valued based on their net equity. That means we must fully disclose any mortgages, liens, or other debts attached to the properties. Uncle Robert's eyes flickered down to the page. For the first time, his confident posture wavered slightly. "A standard clause," he said, a little too quickly. "Of course." "Good," I said, and reached for my folder. Then, to ensure full transparency for the trust, I've taken the liberty of pulling the public records for our respective properties, so we can have an honest discussion about the starting valuations. I slid the first document across the table to him. It was the deed to his house. I had highlighted the section detailing the second mortgage he'd taken out. "Uncle Robert, it looks like your home has a significant second mortgage on it. Could you confirm the outstanding balance for the trust's records?" His face went rigid. The smug smile vanished. He stared at the document as if it were a snake. "That's a private financial matter," he said through gritted teeth. "Not anymore," Ms. Albright interjected smoothly, her voice calm but firm. "Once you agree to place an asset in a trust, all financial details related to that asset become material to the trust and its beneficiaries. It's called fiduciary duty." My mother looked back and forth between us, her cheerful expression replaced by one of confusion. "Robert, what is she talking about?" I didn't wait for his answer. I slid the next set of papers across the table. "We'll also need to account for these 2 tax liens the city has placed on your rental properties. That's another $30,000 of debt the trust would have to absorb." Robert's face was now pale. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. The trap was closing. "And then there's this," I said, my voice dropping as I produced the final document concerning him. "A court judgment against your business for $52,000 in unpaid bills. Since your business is a sole proprietorship, that debt is personally attached to you, and by extension, your assets." "This is an out." "Rage," Robert sputtered, slamming his hand on the table. Ethan finally looked up from his phone, his bored expression replaced by alarm. "You have been spying on me." "It's called due diligence, Uncle," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "You wanted to manage my assets. I thought it was only prudent to see how you were managing your own, and frankly, I'm not impressed." I then turned my attention to Ethan. "And since you're listed as a primary beneficiary, the trust would also be impacted by your financial stability. Which brings me to Vibe Connect." I slid the LLC's credit report in front of him. "It seems your revolutionary startup is nearly $200,000 in debt, a loan that your father personally guaranteed. A loan you have made 0 payments on." Ethan looked like he'd been slapped. He stared at the paper, speechless. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Robert, is this true?" My uncle stood up so abruptly his chair screeched against the floor. His face was a mask of pure fury. The facade had not just cracked, it had been utterly demolished. "You devious little," he began, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Devious?" I stood up to meet his gaze, my voice ringing with all the years of suppressed anger and hurt. "You call me devious? You came into my home, the home I bought with 7 years of my life, and you tried to trick me into signing it over to you so you could save your own skin. You wanted to steal my future to pay for your failures. You didn't come here to protect me. You came here to use me, just like you have always used me." Tears were streaming down my mother's face. "Clara, I didn't know." "Yes, you did," I rounded on her. "You knew, you've always known. You just chose to look the other way because it was easier. It was always easier to sacrifice me than to stand up to him or to make Ethan face consequences. You were his messenger. You were part of this." Uncle Robert grabbed his briefcase. "This meeting is over. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "I doubt it," Ms. Albright said coolly, not even bothering to stand. "Unless you'd like these public records to be attached as evidence in a formal complaint for attempted fraud. I imagine that wouldn't do your real estate license any favors." That was the final blow. He froze, his hand on the door. The threat of losing his livelihood, the very last pillar of his false identity, was something he couldn't ignore. Without another word, he wrenched the door open and stormed out. Ethan, looking utterly terrified, scrambled after him. My mother remained, sobbing at the table. "How could you do this to your family?" I looked at her, and for the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a vast, empty distance. "You did this," I said quietly. "You, him, Ethan, you are not my family. A family celebrates you. They don't try to consume you. Now please, get out of my house." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Finally, defeated, she gathered her purse and walked out, closing the door softly behind her, leaving me alone in the quiet, sunlit room with the truth, finally, laid bare. The silence that descended upon the apartment after my mother left was absolute. It was a heavy, weighted silence, but it wasn't lonely. It was the sound of a great, crushing weight being lifted. Ms. Albright began to quietly gather her papers, her movements efficient and unobtrusive. "You handled that remarkably well, Clara," she said, her voice holding a note of genuine respect. "Most people would have crumbled." "I've had a lot of practice swallowing my feelings," I replied, a wry, tired smile touching my lips. It felt good to finally spit them out. She nodded, handing me her card. "The trust documents are, of course, null and void. My firm will send your uncle a formal letter tomorrow advising him that any further contact will be considered harassment. My fee for today's consultation and the letter is on the house. Consider it a professional courtesy. It's not every day you get to see a bully get so thoroughly and elegantly dismantled." With a final, encouraging nod, she left. I was alone again, but this time it was different. This wasn't the aching emptiness of the night of the failed party. This was the clean, quiet space of liberation. I walked around the room, touching the walls, looking out the window at the city. It was all mine, not just the physical space, but the future it represented. A future free from their manipulations, their expectations, their constant, draining entitlement. The fallout was, as expected, immediate and dramatic. My phone was bombarded with texts from my mother, a chaotic jumble of accusations, pleas, and guilt trips. I was ungrateful, cruel, destroying the family. I read none of them in full. I simply created a new folder in my contacts called Do Not Answer, placed her number, my Uncle S, and my cousins in it, and set it to silent. It was a diggy. Tal amputation, and it was painless. A week later, a bouquet of funereal-looking lilies arrived at my office. The card was from my mother. "We can fix this. Family is forever." I dropped the card and the flowers into the nearest trash can. Family wasn't forever, not my version of it. My version had been a toxic, one-sided contract that I had just declared null and void. The real healing began in the small moments that followed. It came from buying a ridiculously comfortable armchair and curling up in it to read for an entire Sunday, uninterrupted. It came from painting one of the walls in my living room a bold, vibrant teal, a color my mother would have called tacky. It came from hosting my first real housewarming party, a week after the disastrous family meeting. This time, the guest list was different. It was Maya, my friends from work, my old roommate, the people who had genuinely cheered for me from the sidelines. The apartment was filled with real laughter, with sincere congratulations, with people who saw my home as a reflection of my hard work, not as an opportunity for themselves. Maya arrived early, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne. "To new beginnings," she said, her eyes shining with pride as she looked around my space, "and to incinerating the bridges that lead to toxic wastelands." We popped the cork, and the sound echoed joyfully in the room. Later that night, long after the other guests had left, Maya and I sat on the floor, leaning against my new armchair, eating pizza, hot, fresh, and delicious, out of the box. "You know," I said, taking a bite, "the night they all bilayed on me, I sat in this exact spot, surrounded by 5 boxes of cold pizza." "And look at you now," Maya said, nudging my shoulder with hers. "Same spot, better pizza, and infinitely better company." She was right. In losing the family I was born into, I was finally free to build the one I chose. A family built not on obligation or blood, but on mutual respect, genuine support, and unconditional love. My family was Maya, who had been my strategist and my rock. It was my friends, who celebrated my wins without a hint of jealousy. I was beginning to realize myself. I had been my own provider, my own protector, and my own champion for years. I just hadn't recognized it. The months that followed were peaceful. I poured my energy into my work, my friendships, and my home. I heard through the grapevine that Uncle Robert's financial troubles had caught up with him. He had to sell his big house and his rental properties at a loss. Ethan's startup, Vibe Connect, officially folded, and he had to get a real job in retail. My mother, I was told, had moved into a small apartment, her life significantly downsized. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a quiet, detached sense of cosmic rebalancing. They had built their lives on a foundation of deceit and entitlement, and it had, predictably, collapsed. One evening, about a year later, I was watering the plants on my balcony, looking out at the city lights twinkling to life. My apartment was no longer a collection of boxes and dreams. It was a home, filled with art, books, and memories of happy evenings with friends. It was a sanctuary I had fought for and won. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya, "Pizza tonight." I smiled and texted back, "Always." The unopened pizza boxes from that first, lonely night were now a distant memory, a symbol of a life I had thankfully left behind. I had learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of my life, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. And that true wealth isn't about property or assets. It's about the peace you feel when you close your own front door and know, with absolute certainty, that you are finally, truly home.